Microsoft Excel 2003, organizing data in groups and outlines. What we're going to do is start moving towards taking our data, grouping it, outlining it, organizing it in a much more succinct fashion. And this video is our first step in the right direction. When we start off with this first in the series on organizing data, we're going to be looking at grouping and outlines. Now, a lot of people say, well, what do you mean by grouping and outlines? Are you talking about just, going into Word and doing this and then coming back to Excel? No, we're talking about doing this within Excel, making the data easier for us to see and understand. So the first thing we're going to do when we're organizing our data is learn how to group it together and outline it, and then include a very special way of outlining it, which are subtotals. One great advantage of using Microsoft Excel is the fact that you can organize your data. You don't only just analyze it, you can organize it to make it easier for you to find, putting it into different spreadsheets and different types of columns and rows and data. Wherever you put it, you're pretty much organizing it. Well, what if you only want to see certain aspects of the data at certain time? Now, we know of one way that we can do this. If I didn't want to see, for example, in this sales figures 1 example file, if I didn't want to see any of the April data that I have here for my sales, what can I do? I can merely hide all of these rows, right click here, as we've seen before, and I'm going to hide the rows. Well, great, no problem. Now I'm not looking at the April material. Now, I will probably get busy and I'll be clicking over here and doing this and adding this and doing that. And then what happens? I forget that I've got hidden rows. The only way I might remember is that, oh, wait, yeah, look, see, I've got that little dark mark here, and I notice it goes from 1 to 12. I probably have some hidden rows. Well, how do you get rid of that? Do you right-click here and you try to unhide? Oh, that didn't work. And then you click here and you're going, oh, I want to unhide. What do you have to do? You have to, like, select all of that, right-click, and then click unhide so you can see everything. You have to select across that line. Well, that gets to be a real big pain. So what we can do is we can actually group our data and then outline it. Just like you could see an outline on a term paper, you can outline it here. For example, if I wanted to, I could outline all of this data right here and say that, and group all this data and say that it belongs to one group. And then this data belongs to another group. And then down here for June, well, this data belongs to another group. Now, the only way that we can do this is if Excel sees that it has a summary row for something. In this case, this is a summary row of the total number of sales. Or if I had a column over here that was a summary column of information that was coming across the rows, then it can group. And by the way, I can group this across this way, or I can go down through the rows. So I have both options no matter what I want to do. I can go do the columns, I can do down the rows. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to group this information together. So I'm going to highlight these rows right here, 2 through 10, and I'm going to make it one group. Now where I go to do this is under Data. I click on the Data menu and Group and Outline. Here I'm going to go ahead and click on the group. So what it does is it groups this data together, and it puts a little minus sign saying here is where I'm going to subtract or crunch this group together as part of this summary row. Now if I wanted to, I want to make this now, of course, a summary row group. So I hit this and I grab these 3 rows and I come up here to Data and I do the same thing, Group and Outline, and I group them together, and look at that. Now these are a separate group. And then I come down here and I say, well, I want the June numbers to be a separate group. I can come up here to Data, hit Group and Outline, and hit Group. And now I've placed them into outline form. Now right now you might say, well, okay, Chris, big deal. You've got a little line with a minus over here to the side. Oh, but look at what I can do now. You have 2 levels to this outline. I've got the sense of this total number of sales for each column. If I click on a minus here, watch what happens. Oh, look at that. It took all those rows and it dropped it down and just said that, well, that's the total number of sales. That's hidden over there. I can do that for May as well. And now I'm only looking at June's data, but I always have that constant reminder over here that, hey, there's other groups of data over here that represent this total number of sales of 9 and this total number of sales of 3. So if I click on that plus, boop, there it goes. It brings it up. And I can do it as well right here by clicking on this plus sign, and now I have all of my data being shown again. If I want to, though, and not have to click on every single one of these minus signs, I could have group after group after group all the way down here as I scroll. I can merely go to the top here, and this is the second layer, which has all the information. You can see the little dot, 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 dot. But if I click on one, it will minimize them all down to this layer of the outline, which is we have a group that's the total number of sales of 9. We have a group right here, a total number of sales of 3, and a group of the total number of sales of 8. And of course, if I wanted to, I could say, well, this is going to be April, and this is going to be May, and I'm typing this information, and this is going to be June. So now, when I open up, and I can expand all the groups by clicking on layer 2 again, it now shows all the data I've added, June, May, and April, and it says total number of sales. And again, if I subtract it, it'll tell me this is the April total number of sales group. And if I hit plus, again, I've expanded it. Now, I've shown that several times so you can see exactly how this works. In this case, did you notice I went through and I manually added the groups? I can do it automatically. Watch this. All I need to do is come up here to data. I'm going to say group and online, and I am going to clear the outline. That will clear all groupings that I have. We're now back to page 1. But look at my data that I entered here on this cell. Remember, I added April. It didn't change any of the data that's on the screen. It is only a way for us to organize the data to make it more easy to view. While doing this manually might be the way to go, typically, though, if you've already put in some sort of summary row like we see here, and a summary row, by the way, needs to contain a formula that is in concern to the what we call the detail rows. So this is a detail row, the amount in the sales or the Bob or salesperson. So we've done some sort of formula or function on the detail rows. And this is a summary of whatever that is. You can see that right here. We've got a summary where we count how many sales were done for that particular month. Same thing is true if I click down here on this row, I've got the same thing. So that's how Excel is able to go out and say, oh, okay, this is a summary row, and so we're going to group the details up above it into one section. If I wanted to do this automatically, all I have to do is go ahead and select all this information right here. I'm going to go down, scroll down. We're going to select all the numbers here, and I'm going to come up to the data screen, click on it, and then say, hey, look, I want to group an outline. Now, I could go ahead and group everything on group, but no, I want to auto outline. When I click on auto outline, look what it did. It said, look, we've got this data. Here, let me select off so you can see. This data going down the rows, it must be summarized right here because I see a formula and it's in the row right below all this detail. So I'm going to make that a summary row. Then it took these 3 and said, yep, here's another summary, so we'll make that one. And it took these 8 and it made it a summary. And it did it automatically. I didn't have to go in manually selecting each and every one of these in order to create this grouping and make the next grouping and then make the next grouping. It just automatically did it for me. Now, I just said something that might have made you scratch your head. How did Excel know that this was going to be the summary row for all of this information versus maybe the summary row for all of this information below it? Well, the reason is by default, Excel expects summary rows to be below the amount of data that you want to summarize, or if in the case if this was a column and we were summarizing over here, it would assume that it's to the right. Well, we can change that by coming up here to the data, group and outline, and we go to settings. On the settings, it says the summary rows are below the detail, or the summary columns are to the right of the detail. So you can go in here and you can change that as you need to. If you want to, maybe it's above, or maybe it's below, or maybe it's on to the left or to the right. Whatever it is, you can change it. I'm going to leave it the default as it is. Go ahead and click OK. So here we can see the outlining taking place. Now, what do you think is one of the most popular things that you can group things by? Would you believe subtotals? Let's show you how to do that next. To do this demo, I'm going to go ahead and open up a separate one of these sales figures examples that doesn't have the total number of sales in here. In fact, it's pretty much more raw data. So go up to File, click Open on Sales Figures. It's one that I've already put together here. And here you can see we don't have any real summary rows here. Instead, we just have the blank raw data just with the titles, which is good because what the subtotal option will do is kind of combine the work of formulas and summaries with the outlining and the grouping that we just saw. What I'm going to do is select all of it, including the titles. In fact, it's always good to kind of put a title up here because that's what it's going to assume is the title for those columns or rows, depending on how you have it set up. And I'm going to take and select all of this data. Okay? The next thing I'm going to do is come up to Data, and notice I have the option of subtotals. When I click on subtotals, it brings up my subtotal dialog box, and it says, all right, where do you want to have these summary subtotals put into place? Do you want to do it at each change in the month, the year, the salesperson, the sales, the units, the type? How do you want to do this? Well, let's go ahead and just stick with the month. That's a good one to use. So at each change in the month, we're going to subtotal those sales. Now, which function are we going to use? Well, right now it's going to use count. Well, I don't want to use count. I'm going to go ahead and say, I want you to use sum. So just to understand, subtotals aren't just for adding up everything. You can also do counting, you can do averaging, max, min, you can do products. I mean, you can do just about anything you can think. Count the numbers, standard deviations, many different things. Okay, now that I all said that, I'm going to stick with sum. Now it's going to say, what do you want to add the subtotals for? In other words, what do you want to add these things up for? Well, I'm going to pick sales, and we'll also do units. I'm not going to do region. I'm going to take region off. So now it's going to say, all right, at each change in the month, I want you to subtotal up the sales and the units. If I already had current subtotals, maybe I got a spreadsheet that already had some, I can replace what any current subtotals were on the page just by keeping this checked. But if I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want a different one, I can deselect it. I'm going to go ahead and select that. Page break between groups. What does that mean? Well, if you're trying to print this up, this is really nice because then what you can say is, look, at every break in these groups that I'm going to group, I'll make it a different page. So that way when you print it out, one page would be the April month, one page would be the May sales, and the other one would be the June sales. And that'll be good. So I can do the page break between groups if I want. Well, this isn't a lot of data. I can probably fit it on one page. And do I want the summary below the data or somewhere else? If I deselect that, I want it somewhere else. In this case, we'll keep it below the data. That's nice and simple. I go ahead and click OK, and let's watch it go in action. Look what it did. I'm going to deselect here so you can see. It went ahead and it said, all right, here is all of April's totals for sales. There's my sales total, $48,754. And the units, 45,225 units. So it subtotaled both of these. And it used the title April total, in this case May total, and then down here June total. And look what else it did. It even gave me the grand total. It gave me the grand total for all my sales as well as all of my units. So this is just a really neat capability here to do this automatically. If you notice, I didn't do anything. I didn't count this up. It automatically put in the formulas. See, subtotal we have right there. Then we have the subtotal here. If I come down here, here's a different subtotal, and it's got all the formulas that we have in here. Got the subtotal here for June, and I got the subtotals for the units, and then the grand big Pumbaa grand total. And meanwhile, over here, look at this. If I want to look at my data, let's say I want to look at all of it. Well, that's 3. What if I just want to see it month by month? I click on 2, and it shows you that here's all of the April total, the May total, the June total, and the grand total. And I can even go back and just show what the grand total is. I always know that there is more data over here because I see my grouping and outlining over here. So I can merely just click on 1 or 2 or 3 and see all that information. If I want to minimize April and just look at the May and the June data, I can do that. There's April's total still there, but I can see May's data and June, and then I can do that, and I can just see June. And you can, do whatever you want to do and show whatever you want to show, just depending on what you click on. And this is, again, just a way of organizing our data, but with subtotals, I'm actually performing some calculations as well. So I can get these totals, these subtotals that you see here. So our first look at organizing data include looking at how we group our data together and create them into outlines, so that way we can expand or contract the data and just view certain aspects of it without having to hide entire rows or columns and then figuring out, hey, where did we hide those rows and columns? So that's a much easier, much more simple way of looking at our data. Then we saw one way that we can organize, group, and outline our data is by creating subtotals. And the nice thing about Excel is that it will do it automatically for us by taking the data. We then choose what we want to organize it based upon group, and then it will subtotal information for us and even provide us with a grand total. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.